Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how rents have increased at a much faster rate than wage inflation. I think that's something we all know. What's recently I've noticed is there's been a number of groups, think tanks and so on, at the smaller end of the scale, but nonetheless that have been looking at the benefit that mass migration brings to the West. Now, the propaganda is that mass migration is this huge benefit. It makes us all richer and so on and so forth. It's no matter how you look at it, it's great, it's good, it's wonderful, it's fantastic. When the truth is the complete opposite of that. It's a diabolical disaster for the West, and is obviously so. And it's only by suppressing any commentary, hiding information that to the contrary, and of course spewing out vast slabs of insane lies and propaganda can the elite, globalist elite class pretend and attempt to convince us that it's all a good thing, the mass migration. So I've noticed that there are some studies around. If you want to do some looking, there are some studies around that actually do objective measurement of whether mass migration has been good. Particularly, they look at things like rents and matters that affect the cost of living and the standard of living of the existing Western citizenry before the mass immigration came along. So I just want to look at some of the numbers here, and the claim, and this seems to be reasonably consistent no matter whose study you look at, but the claims are that rents, as an example, and you could even extrapolate this out to property prices generally, as in buying and selling property, but the inflation rate, the natural inflation rate of property and rents, mass migration has caused that inflation on prices to accelerate by 90% above the natural inflation increase. And I'll come back to that in a minute and do some numbers. Now, the 90% is more of the big cities, like the Londons and the Sydneys and the New Yorks and so on. But it's over 70% even in rural and regional areas, not areas in the middle of nowhere, but and you see this certainly in Sydney. And clearly you've got a very controlled real estate pricing environment that bears no resemblance to market forces. It's being artificially propped up by mass offshore buying and, of course, by the big financial institutions. Now, I put an example in the description, and so just to extend it, I've used this example before, but I want to now relate it to this price increase that the rate above natural inflation that has been caused by mass migration. And so this is a $20 apartment. This is an apartment that I actually rented years ago. So a $20 a week apartment, one bedroom apartment, and we look at if we look, say, between 1975 and 1990, or early 1990s, the rate of inflation beyond wages was about 1/3 of 1% per annum, a little bit less, between a quarter and a third. So let's say a third for sake of argument. So it was increasing by 1%. This is beyond the rate of wage inflation, 1% for every 3 years. So it's $20 in 1975. Now, if you extrapolate that out by A, the wage inflation, and B, the rate of rent inflation, rent price inflation beyond wages, it would come to around $265, give or take, $65 a week. So $20 in 1975. Today, it should be $265 a week, assuming, again, the rate of wage increase and the inflation rate beyond the wage increase of the rent prices, as I say, going up by between a quarter and a third percent of each year. Now, what is that place is up for rent now, actually, for $475 a week, and you get less for your money. There was a quite a large storage unit that came with. That's no longer with that. So, but anyway, just on the face of it, $475 a week as versus 265. It seems to say 275, so we get a neat $200 a week. That's still between $10,000 and $11,000 a year more than it would have been under the natural normal rate of rental price inflation relative to wages that had been there. Now you can actually plot, and I didn't quite realize this, and I looked at some of the raw data that in one of these think tank studies they had, and so and it didn't take me that long actually. I superimposed the rate of mass migration, and then looked at the rate of rent increase. Again, this is the rent increase beyond the rate of natural inflation, beyond the rate of wages. And you can see a direct correlation. There's no sort of mystery going on here or any uncertainty. There's a direct correlation between the mass migration and the rents that people are paying and the house prices as well. I mean, here's an example: a house that just before this is for sale. A house just before mass migration, you could buy for $85,000. Today, that house is over $1 million. So in the space of 25 years, that house has gone up by 12 times in 25 years. I mean, it's insane. An insane rate of inflation. So this is the sort of numbers that we're dealing with that are well beyond the natural rate of inflation, which of course means that people on an average wage are having their or anyone, like they're having their standard of living torn to pieces. I mean, you can multiply that out further if it's a 2-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom apartment. So even now, places that were 5 and 6 years ago, $350 a week to rent, and now $750 a week to rent. That's the extent, and this is all coming out of people's income. So no wonder people are living hand to mouth. But there's a number of other things that occurred as mass migration was taken. It's not just mass migration, because all these people coming in, there's a lot of them are penniless, illiterate peasants. They're not rich people who are able to walk in the door and buy property. Far from it. And especially like the Indians and some of the Chinese, they might live 2, 3, 4 generations in one house. So this idea that every migrant that comes in buys a house is nonsense. What happened at the same time as the mass migration was taking off, that you had coming in as like front running the whole thing was the Australian political class. They went out and bought up real estate wholesale. They all knew that the mass migration was coming and that it would be around for a long time. So they flocked to buying real estate and fuckloads of it as well. But on top of that, and more importantly, and much more substantially, was the offshore buying of Chinese Communist Party warlords and assorted offshore corrupt rich goons that were coming in and buying vast swathes, hundreds and hundreds of properties each, and then using their fellow citizens as nominees, pretending that they were owning the property. So you have illiterate floor cleaners who own prime real estate portfolios, even though their income's only $30,000 a year. They supposedly own vast swathes of prime real estate. Yes, sure they do. So you had this, and then at the same time as this was going on, the buying up of vast swathes of real estate and the investors just leaving it empty. So you've got well over 1 million properties in Australia today that just are sitting empty. They're owned by offshore owners, but they're just sitting empty. And if you've got depending on your situation, you can claim quite substantial tax deductions on these places. So if you've got another source of income somewhere and you want to write that off on tax, then you've got a useful way of doing it. But the assumption is that all real estate is, the underlying assumption, if you like, in the tax code and all this sort of stuff. And the view is that in residential real estate, people will buy it as a place to live and bring up their families and all this sort of thing. But it's changed. That's not the way anymore. Residential real estate is a plaything for international finance, not just the BlackRocks and so on. As I say, the communist, Chinese Communist Party goons and the like, buying up real estate. But this is the extent of it. Now, the more interesting thing, I guess, was when I saw these reports and you've got to go looking for them and know where to look. Is that they're heavily suppressed by the media. The media do not touch these things because they clearly and very objectively outline exactly what a diabolical situation mass migration has been for the West and for Western standard of living. And the globalists just simply won't allow that information to get out. So you see very little of it, and if any at all. And again, you have to go looking. So I was surprised that these studies even exist. I thought they would have all been kiboshed and stopped and throttled in the infancy. But there are out there, and they very clearly show just how. I mean, just on the basis of the one-bedroom apartment thing that I mentioned, and say the cost of food and electricity now. Just and assuming you're on the average wage or workers on the average wage, they're looking at this is beyond the rate of inflation. Okay, so they're looking at having to spend an extra $10,000 on rent. Nor is this an improved property, nor is it got gold tiles on the floor or something. It's no better than it was 50 years ago. So an extra $10,000 to $11,000 a year on rent. $2,000 to $3,000 a year on energy, electricity, gas, that sort of stuff, and another $2,500 to $3,000 a year on food. So just on average wage, the extra amount of money you have to find to live the same lifestyle as you would have in 1975, that cost is say $16,000 a year. So to exist on the same standard of living that you would have had in 1975, you have to find an extra $16,000 a year just to have that same standard of living. Now, that'll just illustrate to you where your standard of living has gone, because $16,000 a year, this assumes that the average wage is a lot of money for people on the average wage. And so that's where their standard of living has disappeared. And this is what, not just mass migration and isolation, but what came with it, the mass buying of offshore investors and the BlackRocks one, the mass buying of real estate as an investment plaything rather than a place for people to live. And the combination of those factors has lowered the standard of living of every Western citizen. And it's okay if you're a peasant coming from the third world and you had nothing anyway. You think that you've arrived in paradise when you come to the West. But these people haven't contributed, they don't contribute, won't contribute. They're here to take. They're here to take, not to give, not to share, but to take. And this is an extra parasitic drain on Western resources and indeed the standard of living of the Indigenous population. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.